So today we'll talk about a few things. This is like one of our first pre-midterm sessions that we have. We have two or three of these. Talk about promises and using promises. Done a bit of this, but they are used a lot during midterms, and it's good to have a refresher. And we'll do a couple of jQuery tricks that you really have to know during your midterms. And this stuff wasn't taught. Probably this for sure wasn't taught. So we'll talk about these two things that you really should know, or every developer in jQuery really should know, because it makes your life just so easy. So promises, two sides to promises, right? We know this. Number one is making promises. New promise, right? Give it a callback with resolve and reject. This is getting hard already. My head's hurting already with this stuff. Yeah. Remember this stuff? Remember exam 4? I think they gave you an exam on this stuff. Wasn't easy, was it? The good news is you will probably never have to do this almost in your life as a Node developer. I've written like 3 of these in the last 5 years where I had to make a new promise. So chances are that exam that you wrote, that made you make a promise, was probably the last time you're ever going to have to do that for a very long time. It's not the common, and we all have to look it up. Make a promise. I forgot how to make a promise. Resolve, reject. You got to call resolve or reject someplace. Yeah, it's hard stuff. It's very uncommon you will ever have to make a promise ever again. Yay. Okay. However, the second side to the promise coin is using a promise. Okay. Making promises are hard, but using somebody else's promises, turns out these are pretty easy. And this we do all the time. It's like not an hour goes by, I'm not using a promise. Not a minute goes by almost. It's just like constantly. So we'll be doing promises all the time. We'll focus on that part because really, we just looked at it. We just Google that. We don't do this very often in real life, but this is very, very common. Let's take a look at the common promise pattern. Now, this should look pretty familiar. We've got this pool. I'm using PG as my example, Postgres or Node PG, just because we're kind of in the middle of that right now. So I've got this pool that I created. It could have been a client too. I just made it a pool just for fun. Okay. And we know that I would probably make a query. I'd go const some kind of query or maybe SQL. And I would say something like select star from users. And no, you do not put a semicolon in there. So note to self, no semicolon inside the quotes. So there's my little query string. Okay, and we know that I would go pool dot query, and I'd give it my SQL. So there is my general pattern for calling a PG. We know this. We've done this lots of times already. Okay, and I can get let's get my result. See what I got. Cost result equals. So there is my log my result. There is my simple promise. Let's go ahead and run this and see what I get. So node, I called it main.js. There. And I get back a promise. I get a promise that was, at the time of printing, was pending. Promises have different states. Pending, they always start off with pending, and they can either be resolved or rejected. Pending means it hasn't started yet. The promise hasn't notified us one way or the other how it's feeling. Then I'll say, oh, I feel rejected, or I feel resolved. So that's kind of the 3 moods of a promise. Pending, which is undecided, I guess moody, and then resolved or rejected. Okay. And at this point in time, since we know this is JavaScript, and JavaScript, as we know, is a single-threaded, non-preemptive language, which means it can't do more than one thing at a time. So we run this code runs, this code runs, nothing can happen in here. So in this line, oops, there we go. Let's go line 12 right there. Nothing can happen in here. In the background, no, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going on. You can be absolutely guaranteed that this line runs and this line runs and nothing gets changed between here and here. It's a subtle point, but it's true. Nothing can change. So when I run pull.query, I get back a pending promise and a result, and that result will still be pending when I get to line 14. It can't just magically change. We know that with JavaScript, nothing can happen while JavaScript's busy. Anything is asynchronous can only notify us once JavaScript gets to here. Now it's done. There. And now JavaScript can do other things. So this code runs from top to bottom with absolutely no interruptions. Now, it might surprise you, there are languages where this is not true. There are languages where stuff can actually change. I could have gone, let x equals 5 here, and then console log x. But because that language might be multi-threaded, x can change in between here and here. There can be another thread running what changes x. You can believe it. Now, sounds kind of crazy, but yes, that can happen. Now, fortunately, this is not a problem. In JavaScript, we're guaranteed that between this line, x is guaranteed to be 5. Now, it's not as bad as that. There's ways we handle it in other languages, but in JavaScript, it's off the table. It is single-threaded with no interruptions. That means result can only be pending here. Then our code is done, and then the promise can tell us how it's feeling. It can say, oh, I feel resolved, but it can't happen until here, right? So this is actually a promise. So this function returns a promise and a pending promise. And we know that we can tell the promise how to let us know how it feels by going promise dot then. We use the dot then method of the promise object. We give it a callback. It'll give us some stuff back. Call it res sometimes. There. And when this comment promise is ready, it'll tell us how it's feeling. And I can console log that res. So there's my standard pattern for a promise. Get the promise and then dot then it. Okay. How's a promise feeling? Let's take a look. Oh, well, I got a big object. Looks like I got a PG query object with all kinds of fun stuff in it, which I don't care about. But I do know that I care about this thing called rows. So I'm going to go console log my res dot rows, because that's all I'm really interested in for a PG query. And there it is. So there's my results of my query. I got a few names. It's like 11 or so names of my users table. So this is basic promises 101. Okay. But this isn't done. This object is still there. What if I did this again? What if I then my promise again? What would happen then? Well, one thing to know about how promises work, this executes the command. The dot then just listens for notification. So the query itself only ran once here. In fact, it started here. What this actually did, this sent a signal to the Postgres engine running on your computer. It says, hey, Postgres, I need this. Postgres says, I'll get back to you. There. And we carry on. That's it. In other words, Postgres gave me a promise. It says, yeah, I'll get back to you. I promise I'll get that done for you pretty fast. Okay. And then we keep on going. Now, Postgres is pretty fast. Maybe Postgres did finish, but we couldn't listen, could we? Maybe Postgres got finished, maybe here, maybe, who knows? But we don't know about that because we're busy. I order a pizza and then I go start doing stuff. Maybe the pizza's ready, but they texted me, but I can't check my messages because I was too busy. My phone, oh, look, pizza's ready. Oh, it was ready 10 minutes ago. Well, I was busy until then. Same with a dot then. This simply tells us what happened in the promise. So if I run this twice, I get two dot thens, I get two contents. This tells me what happened with that promise. A promise is a static object, doesn't change. Once it's resolved, it's done. Lots of thens. Doesn't do a thing. It'll simply tell me the contents, if you will, of the promise or how it resolved. So we don't normally then the same promise more than once. That'd be quite rare. So, but you can do it. Okay, just to demonstrate the fact that it is a static object. It does not trigger another query. It just tells us what happened in the query. Okay, so now we normally do this. We'd probably not do a separate variable for that. We'd probably do this instead. We'd go pull.query and then put the dot then just chained like this. This is normally what you'd see. Function, promise function, next line, tab, dot, then. That's the usual pattern you'll see. And I get my one again. Okay. So this is your promise pattern. Now, we don't chain promises or the same promise, but we do chain our dot thens. This does happen a lot. For instance, what if I did this? What if I did another dot then here? Now this is a bit different. Now I'm going, my promise, dot then, dot then. I'm not thenning the same promise. I'm thenning the then, in effect, aren't I? What do I expect to see here? Can I even do this? Can I do a dot then and then do a dot then on the dot then? I don't know. Let's take a look and see what happens here. Let's do a clear. In fact, we'll do a clear before we'll do each run. You can chain your commands in Linux by going command then semicolon. It'll run more than once. So we'll do a clear and then we got undefined. So the second then gave us undefined. But let's just quickly make a note. We'll call this then one. We'll call this then two. Just for fun. There, this is then two, and we'll just console log the res. And we get then one was our stuff, and then two is undefined. Looks innocent, but this undefined takes us to the heart of how promises actually work. This is like the key topic of this entire talk on promises, that undefined. No, it sounds innocent. This explains everything about how promises work. Let's take a look at this. So here's my dot then and my dot then. I got my res from my query, res.rows, but I got undefined on the next one. Why? Does anyone know why did I get undefined on the next one? And it makes perfect sense when you understand just how promises work. Let's try something else. What if I return something from the dot then? Return 5. Let's run it again. Oh, my then 2, I'll put a colon there. My then 2 now is 5 in the res. Now that's fun. Try it again. Yeah, looks like res is 5. So what this means is if you return something from a dot then, it ends up in the next then. It ends up here. So anything you return in this then ends up in the next then. And this is one of those, if you forget everything else about today, remember that. Anything returned from a dot then ends up in the next dot then's res. Okay, and I can do it again. Another dot then. And this is then 3. And I get data 5 undefined. Oh, didn't return anything. Okay, let's return something. Return the res, why not? Just pass it along. And now the 5 keeps it going, and I can go forever doing this, of course. So once again, anything you return from the then ends up in the next then when you're chaining dot thens this way. And this we do use an awful lot, okay? I'm going to call this result. Let's make it more clear. As the name really depends on, in SQL, it'll be called data, right? You'll see it called data quite often. So data and data.rows. So I'll call it data for now. There. It's just a variable. You can call it anything you want, but I'll call it data here. In other libraries, it just depends what you get. But I think it makes good sense to call it data here. So yeah, there's our data that we got back from the promise. So this we do an awful lot. This is really, really common. Well, how does this help us? I've got this here. How does being able to chain a promise help me? Dot then and then return next. Then well, let's watch this in action. Turns out, what if I was to make a function? I'll go ahead. I'm going to turn this into a function. This first one. There we go. I make a function called get users. There. Let's put my code right inside there. There we go. There it is. Okay. Got a function get users, and I want to call get users. Dot then. Cool. So I've got a function here. I want to call my function. Of course, it's a promise. I have to go dot then. Okay. So what am I going to get? Let's take a look. And let's just not console log that for now. Let's just put this here. Okay, well, I'll put a console log for now. Okay. Let's take a look. And I get a nasty error saying, all the time, cannot read properties of undefined, like the most common error we see all the time in Node. Cannot read properties of undefined reading then. Like, oh, of course, I forgot to return something. Okay, return my data. Or return, like in LightBnB, return data.rows. Silly me, I forgot that. Okay, there, all fixed. Let's take a look again. What? Same problem. But I'm clearly returning something from my dot then, but I'm still getting this error that says undefined reading dot then on line 24. Huh. So what's my mistake? I'm clearly returning data.rows, but it says I'm trying to read a property of undefined. And of course, what this means is you're trying to read the then of undefined. In other words, you're trying to go undefined dot then. And yeah, great catch, Robin. Not returning anything. My function returns what? Well, nothing. And what's the word for nothing in JavaScript? It's undefined. So my function is in fact returning undefined. It needs to return a promise. I got to return a promise. Huh. I got a promise? I don't know. What have I got inside here that resembles a promise? Well, this thing kind of resembles a promise. So I'm going to return that instead. Let's return that whole thing. Okay. Now what happens? Oh, my then two got the, it all worked. But let's break this down. What's happening here? I'm not returning pool.query, am I? I'm returning pool.query.then. So this means if this returns pool.query.then, this line becomes pool.query.then again. So this is simply chaining a promise again. I've just put the first then inside this function, but really this is the same thing. It's pool.query.then again. And I read the contents of my second dot. This is how it works in our favor. We can use this trick of chaining dot thens to put stuff inside functions. Just don't forget to return the dot then inside your function. Takes to its next question I might have. In fact, this is a question I ask on interviews all the time. There. Back to normal again? I think it is. So knowing what we know, and dot then is a function. What does dot then return? Can anyone tell me? What does the dot then function itself return? This is pool.query.then now. So what does that expression, or maybe like this, there. Oops, there we go. What does this whole expression return? Pool.query.then, there. What does it return? In other words, what does dot then return? And this is an important point. What does a dot then return? Of course, the answer is in the next line, dot then, right? Looks like I can do a dot then on the return value of a dot then. So knowing I can dot then the return of dot then, what must the return value be? It could only be one thing, right? What's that one thing? What is the only thing you can do a dot then on? A promise. It's technically called a thenable object. That's actually a word. Thenable. It's a promise. So since I'm doing a dot then on the dot then itself must return a promise. It couldn't return anything else. So the return from a dot then is a promise. I asked on interviews of senior devs, and I get this deer in the headlights look. Like, I don't know. And I try to talk them through it. Well, you can dot then it. What would a promise return? I don't know. Never thought of it. So a dot then returns a promise. Okay. And if you return something for dot then, you return a promise that resolves to that thing. If you return nothing, then this dot then, of course, gives you undefined in the next dot then. Okay. So once again, anything returned from the dot then ends up in the next dot then, and dot then itself just returns a promise. So you can dot then it again. It gets kind of complicated, but it allows us to do this dot then thing over and over and over again like this, like forever, because we're always returning a promise. Of course, any more than 2 is kind of overkill. You'd never see more than 2. Okay, so this is pretty cool. We can use dot thens. What happens if something goes wrong, though? So I've got my dot then. There's my simple console log my. Let's just console log my. There. Data.rows. Still work? Huh, surprising it does. Okay. This is great. But what happens if I make a mistake? What happens if I'm doing a midterm, it's 4 a.m, been coding all night, and I mistype my select. Select. What's going to happen? Well, I run my code and I get, what happened? Oh gosh, I can't read this. A nasty dump from Node, and my code stopped. It froze. In other words, I couldn't get any farther. It never did anything, right? So what happened? Okay, well, in this case, it failed. My promise was rejected. Apparently, Pool Query doesn't have a good sense of humor. It doesn't like the word select. It rejected the promise because that was a valid SQL. So I got a rejection, and in promises, you gotta learn to handle rejection. This, I guess, in this business in general, you gotta handle it. But certainly in promises, you have to handle rejection. And how do we handle rejection? Who can tell me? What is the thing we use to handle rejection? It's like the sibling of dot then, which is, it's dot catch. Dot catch. What's the same? We oftentimes call it ERR, just one of those things we commonly use. ERR. Okay, and we can console log, I don't know, query failed. Good enough. Okay, so now what's going to happen? Well, that's a little more friendly, and my code completed. The question is, would I recommend against try? I would most certainly recommend you do not use try and catch. Don't do that. No, do not do that. Whatever you do. First off, they're not real. They are just wrappers, what's called syntactic sugar around promises. They simply make a promise out of something. So I would avoid using try catch for now until a lot later. And when you see code on the internet, don't copy and paste it if it's got try catch, because that'll just mess you up. Dot then, dot catch. Okay. And it failed, but it failed nice, and my code continued. In other words, it kept on going. The other way, without the catch, what happened was my code crashed and everything stopped. Not one more line of JavaScript can execute. My program's dead. It couldn't run. Of course, in servers, this is not a good thing, is it? We want things to keep running. So we handle these rejection errors gracefully, and we just keep on going. Okay, like this. So there's my catch right there. I'll put a catch. Put a string around that. I'll say catch. and a comma. There. So my catch sent the message. Okay. In fact, let's look at this error message though. Let's look at the ERR. What is that thing? Whoa. So this is actually not Node. This is me. I printed out this catch thing. It kind of looks like an object, but not quite. Like this is object, but what the heck is all this stuff? This is not like any object I've ever seen before. It's got the usual curly braces here, but it's got this stuff, which doesn't look very object-esque at all. So it turns out this is a very special kind of object. It's called a throwable. Error. Let's call it error for now. But it's a throwable. It means it can be thrown. It was thrown by the promise. And the catch caught the throwable. So when you hear this expression, throw and catch, it means an error was thrown. You've heard this term before. It threw an error. What does that mean? Why do they say throw an error? Well, that's where it's from. It's actually from baseball. The analogy was baseball when they wrote this stuff. And they called it throw and catch. You throw an error, which means somebody had better catch that error. Otherwise, it's game over. It's not like 3 strikes. It's like no one catches that ball, Node stops. Okay. So we have to catch the error. And I did in this case. So I had an error that was thrown here, and it was caught by this code here. Cool. And commonly, we can use the err.message. Depending on the library, we get a friendly message. We can read this thing, message. Let's take a look at this. Well, that's kind of handy. Yeah, query failed, syntax error at or near sleep. This is kind of friendly stuff. So we commonly log the err.message. Okay. Oh, for now. But this is a double-edged sword. Catch can get you. There's a catch to catch, okay? Not really a catch, but there is a bit of a gotcha to using a catch. Let's try something. Let's say if I did this code correctly, but I made a mistake in here. Console logg, data.rows. What's going to happen here? Let's take a look. Huh. Query failed. So it looks like not only does a catch any error in your original query, it catches any error above it, including like syntax errors, node errors, like bad anything really, other than actual like missing braces and stuff. But if node started, any error, it's called a runtime error, any runtime error above it, it'll catch, including this kind of stuff. It just fails. Look at that. Wow. Let's look at the error.message again. err.message. What did it say? Oh, that's kind of cool. Console log, that's like node is not a function. And it carried on. So my code didn't crash, even though this was node, it would like totally die, right? If I didn't have this catch in there, it would like terminate my node. Yeah, it'd dump out and it would just stop and nothing would continue, would it? Okay, in fact, if I had a real console log here, just say done. There, just say done. Good enough. Done. Ain't gonna happen because node crashed at that line. But if I put my catch here, I don't get the done, but my code continued to run. Okay. So sometimes this can come back to bite you. Okay. It's kind of handy, which is great because you're protected. Anything you do here, it can't possibly have an error. But what if I did this? What if I'd had this? And once again, imagine it's 3 in the morning. I've been coding all night. Midterms due like tomorrow. Actually, don't do that. Make sure it's done the day before. But my presentation's due tomorrow. I'm working my presentation. And I have a bug in my code. And I run my code and I get query failed. Okay, what's going on here? Go to line 10. Select star from users. What the heck's the matter with that? Maybe it's my eyes. Query failed. Oh no. Now this could be a very complicated query with some joins, maybe some pivots, could be like, 12 lines, a really complex query that I can't figure out why the query failed. What's going on? I even pasted in PSQL and it ran. Doesn't run here. So this has happened to me. It's happened to all of us before. The problem is not here, is it? The problem's here. So I tell people always somewhere include a console log of your ERR dot message somewhere. By the way, every catch you have should have a console log in it, or maybe a console.er, doesn't matter. Either one will work, right? Console log, console error, console logs for now. Don't forget that. If it catches, log it and do something else. And now I run my code. It's like, there we go. Of course. And now it's a 5-minute fix as opposed to a 2-hour fix at 3 in the morning, which we've all done and is no fun. Okay, so just remember that catch does catch stuff above it. Don't forget to put your ERR.message because it'll save you at those late nights. Okay, all right, so there's our then dot catch. There's one other member of the promise family, like the burger family. Mama burger, they got the Papa burger. This is like the teen burger. So what's the third member? Who's the teen burger of the promise family? So one of the dots again. There's one more. Anyone know what that is? There's a third member. It's like the little brother of then and dot catch. Not as powerful, but it still is very, very useful. Anyone heard of this one? It's called dot finally. Takes no parameters in the callback and simply runs finally. There, it runs every time. Finally. There. So it runs there, or it runs, if there's a catch, I'll put a catch here maybe. There. So it runs every time. What this means, it runs regardless of a then or a dot catch. And this is often used for cleanup. Okay. When you want something, you want like maybe have stuff here and stuff here, you need to clean up after yourself. So regardless of what happened, I want this code to run no matter what. Even if it threw, I still need to disconnect this database or maybe clean up this string or something. Has to get done every time. I could put this in every single line, but it's better to put it here instead. In fact, in my case, you notice I've got this big delay here, just sitting there doing nothing. This is a PG node or node PG waiting for another command. And it times out right about now. It waits about 10 seconds. I guess you're done, it times out. But I want to end right away. And I can do that by doing what's called a pool.end. Pool.end, which tells it, hey, I'm done. I don't need this pool anymore. So I'm just telling PG. So instead of putting it there, I can put it in the finally, which means it'll happen every single time. And now my code just always finishes. I finally ran there. Or if I did a select here like this, same thing, it always cleans up after itself. Okay. Note to self though, please never use pool.end in your midterms because you'll be using servers. And if you do this, it'll literally just freeze your server. It will shut down your pool. And in a server, we don't want that. But in my command line program, I want to end when my stuff is ending. So I have it in here. Okay, so there's then catch finally, kind of the family of members. One more thing. What if I want to have a promise execute another promise? I'll take up my end here. For example, I want to do another select inside here. So I want to maybe do it right here. There. Instead of returning data.rows, I want to do a pool.query of, let's say, I'll do this. I think I have a table called widgets. I think they give you some sample code for midterms. And they give you two tables. One's called widgets, I think. There. Okay. Promise. So dot then, and pretty much the same thing with my data. And I want to console log my data dot rows. So after the first promise is done, I want to run the second promise. Run it now. Look at that. Ran my users and then it ran my widgets. But you probably noticed the problem with this, right? I've got my dot then, my little second promise, kind of self-contained inside a dot then. And this is something we'd never do. Okay. We can, totally works, right? We could do it again. We could take this and put it inside this one. Totally could. There, and put this one inside this one. That totally works. But now this is looking pretty familiar, isn't it? It looks like callback hell, doesn't it? Something we'd probably never do. So we could, but we probably shouldn't do it this way. Instead, we can take advantage of that promise fact that we learned, that little factoid that anything you return from a dot then ends up in the next dot then. So instead of this, I can simply return the pool.query and now have another dot then here. And the result of this ends up here. There. So now I'm returning not a value, I'm returning another promise. So the result of this promise ends up in the next dot then. So they run, looks the same, but they run in order. Now this is useful if maybe I want to insert a user and then use that user ID to add to another record and insert the second record next. So let's say this is an insert into users, but I need the ID I got back. And then I use that ID because my database looks like it has user IDs. So I can't insert a widget until I have one. Okay. So it's not really recursive. It's simply happening one after the other. So this is not recursion. It is simply happening serial. This dot then fires, handles the rows, and then only after this is done, this query starts. So I'm running one query after another, which allows me to use the result of this, maybe, use the user ID from the first query. I know it's not good code, but because I've got user ID here, it allows us to use the results of one query in another. This is something you will very likely be doing in your midterms. You're probably doing maybe an insert here and then use the result and getting back maybe an ID and using it when you create another one here. Very common, okay? This guarantees they always run in order. Having our dot then return a second promise, which means it'll happen here, but this one will already be finished. So it's very, very common to chain promises this way. Okay. That's kind of our talk on promises. Just remember a couple things. Anything you return from dot then ends up in the next then. If it's a promise, well, then you get the promise. When you want to chain a promise, make sure you return the second promise. You might be doing this. It's hard to avoid this when you want to insert a record and then use the ID out of that record in another record that you're creating at the same time. We have to do it this way in a chain promise. Okay. Let's talk about jQuery. So this is some jQuery code. It is a very simple little Node Express and jQuery app. Okay, let's run this thing. Yeah, I just ran server.js. Okay. So I've got a server.js, and all it does, it feeds out my public HTML. There. All this code is doing is feeding this file. Okay. And this file gives me a little app that looks like this. Localhost 8080. A list of dogs. Who doesn't love a dog app? So I've got some dogs and I can add a new dog. Is that a dog? It's a famous dog. Einstein. Einstein. That's not, is that Einstein? Breed was who knows. Back to the Future, right? Einstein? Like Doc, you disintegrated Einstein. Yeah, those lines from Back to the Future. Okay, who knows? So I can add Einstein, add. That's my app. Okay, it looks a lot like Tweeter. And once again, as I mentioned, fun fact, every single midterm project is basically Tweeter. Okay, let's look at my code. Okay, that's my. So here, I'm setting some listeners and I'm calling load dogs. Looks familiar. Load tweets, load dogs. I go to load dogs. My load dogs looks like it does a get in the promise. Oh, render dogs. Render dogs gets the container, empties it, looking pretty familiar, for dog of dogs, makes an element, and then prepends the element, and it ends up on my screen. And my dog, of course, my HTML is simply just a container. That right there, there's my dog's container. So all my tweets, or in this case, all my dogs, ends up in this section, just like this. So this is really identical to Tweeter. I just call it dog instead of tweet. Okay, so my code just calls load dogs. Load dogs does a get with a dot then, which does render dogs. Render dogs, as we know, just calls create dog element. That was easy. Makes some HTML. And then we, in this case, prepend that element. So there's our starting point. Okay, this all works. Here's two things I want to do that you are going to find you're going to need. What if, when I click on a dog in this list, click, 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 I want to click on a dog. That's what I want to do. What would I do? So, well, let's take a look. Each one of these is a what? So each one of those elements is an article, right? Article class equals dog article. Okay. I want to have my jQuery code. When I click on it, I want to just click or have an event generated and capture it. So what I normally do? Well, you'd think I'd probably put a click handler on dog article. So $dot article on click. And I'm going to call on article click. I think it's a clever name. On article click. So when I click on an article, I should run this function. How's that sound? Does it sound reasonable? Since every dog is an article there with a class of dog article, that means if I put a listener on dog article on click, it should call on article click when I click on an article. Can we agree with that? Let's take a look. It's console log clicked a dog exclamation mark. Okay, let's go ahead, turn our dev tools on. There, okay. Let's go ahead and click on a dog. Click, 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 click. No console log. What on earth? I know I'm clicking. See, you can't hear my mouse is kind of loud. I am clicking a dog, but I'm not getting nothing. Let's double check. Maybe we got something wrong. Okay, article. They are there. Class equals dog article. That means dot dog article. We know that. Okay. I've put my listener on. Yeah. Dot dog article. On click article click. It's not working. And this is the most common problem people have in midterms. They get a list and they go, what's going on? I can't click on it. My code's broken. So it turns out there's a reason this is happening. Can anyone think what that reason might be? Remember we talked about this if we didn't have a ready function, right? Things don't work because without the ready function, this stuff's not there yet. So I can't click on that button, which of course works in this case, right? Or this, right? They wouldn't work. Well, it turns out I'm telling jQuery, add a listener to everything with a class of dog article. Okay. And do it right now. There. Okay. That means that it'll put a listener on every existing dog article. But what dog articles exist right now? There's none. There are no dog articles until after load dogs. Let's refresh our code. There. Try it again. What if I put after this? Let's take a look. Maybe after. Let's try that. Load my dogs. Huh, still not happening. So what is happening? Well, it turns out, because this is, of course, asynchronous, I'm telling it to, at this moment, when the document finishes loading, add the click handler to every article. But there is no articles. When this page first loads, this is what? This is an empty section. Where's my dogs? There they are. It's empty. There is no dog article any place on this entire page. So I can add a listener, but I'm adding a listener to nothing. There's nothing to add listeners to. Okay. So I got a problem, don't I? Because when I click on a dog, this is a real problem. And it's, as I mentioned, the most common problem people have in their midterms is how to make this work. Because you cannot add a listener to something that will be there later. You can't say, oh, jQuery, if you happen to see a dog article later, please do this. You can't do that. jQuery can only add things or listeners to things that exist right now and not in the future. And of course, all these articles have added a new one. Scooby-Doo. Yes, what was Scooby-Doo? He's a Great Dane, right? Great Dane. Scooby-Doo, our famous dog from history. Doesn't exist, right? Until just now. So jQuery is not going to remember that you want to add a listener to something that might show up later. It only knows what exists now. So here's the trick. Who took the dogs out? Here's the trick. This is an important one. I had to write this one down. Okay. This is what exists at the beginning. This is all I have to work with. I've got a dog section, dogs container, dogs detail. This is all I got. So it has to be one of these are the only things I can add listeners to. Nothing else. There's no articles in here. I can only listen to things that exist. But there is another form of the on function in jQuery. It looks like this. And this is pretty cool. What you can do is I can add listener to the container. This dogs container right there. There. Listen to the container instead. There. Was an ID? I can't remember. It was ID. So hash or pound. Well, what does that do for me? I mean, it'll work, right? It does, but then it doesn't matter where I click. It doesn't know where I'm clicking, right? I'm clicking on the container, but I'm getting someplace. At least it knows I clicked the dog. Okay, there. But now it's the entire container. I can't tell which one of these I clicked on. There's anywhere in the container. So there's a second format. Now I can put a second selector right here. And I can say dog article right here. So listen to the dog container for click. And for any dog article, fire the article click. And now it works. And we can prove that. Let's take this out first. And we'll look at our this, okay? Let's console log this. Go $ this. Come on. There. Okay, so this is a section. Yeah, when I console log, this is the section. So regardless of what I click on, this is a section. Okay, but if I add my cool code back, there we go, class. It's a dog article. Now I'm clicking on the actual dog that I wanted. So now when I click, I'm clicking on that dog. There, look at that. How does that help me? It's an object. Okay, but now I can respond to a specific item so that this becomes that item. But how do I get the dog back? This is just a jQuery object. That's just stuff. Like, how can I read this thing? Where's my content? Like, where's my dog? Oh, it's some inner HTML. I suppose I could parse that maybe. That looks really scary. I could parse this. I could get the inner text and I could parse that. but that's really ugly, okay? Turns out there's a really elegant way to handle this. So I've got the click, and I want to get the original dog back. And to do that, we can take advantage of another jQuery function called data. You can attach any data to any jQuery object. For example, I want to attach the dog object to each one of these. So I want to have in my list, these jQuery elements also have the original dog object attached. So I can grab the dog right off of it. Turns out that's very easy. What I can do is I can simply take the element, because here I've got the element I've just built, and I've got that dog. I can go .data, and you can give it a name. Doesn't matter. Pick a name. And the object, I'll call it dog because it's a good name. There. So now I'm saving the original dog element and attaching it to every single element. And now if I go here, I go this dot, well, let's go my data. Let's go const dog equals my dollar this, oops, dot data, and I named it dog. And if I console log my object, what do I get? I get the dog. How cool is that with the ID and everything? This is something you will need in your midterms. So remember this one. So you can attach to every jQuery object any random data by simply doing the data command. In other words, element.data, give it a name, a key, and you can assign pretty much anything. I'm just, of course, in this case, attaching the original object. And now it's available in the list. And now my this.dog works, and I can use it for all kinds of cool things. For example, I can maybe display the dog. Let me grab one here. I made another one here. Here's a classic example. I want to grab this. I'm going to get my dog, and now I'm just going to put my dog off to the right here. So I'm going to grab these things and put on the right, like this. So now click on a dog. That's not very good styling, is it? Yeah. Anyway, let's make it a little wider. There. So now I can click on my dog, and I got a real app that's working. This is pretty cool, apart from the crappy styling. Very common thing in jQuery. Okay. All right. That is our talk today on promises and a bit about jQuery, everyone. Midterm start in 2 days. We will be here all week to help you next week, and looking forward to seeing things on Friday. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.